Next guests are not revolutionaries. They instead are, with all due respects, new tandem of peanut butter and jelly. We had them together on the show last week to talk about the Empire State primary, and it was so satisfying and so tasty, we're not ashamed of going back for seconds. John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine and New York Post columnist, and Gotham City veteran Adam Nagourney, now out in La La Land for the New York Times. Gentlemen, Washington Square Park, your most vivid memory, go.
I was about 7 years old, and I was 68, 69, and I saw someone having an acid trip right in front of me while I was walking through it with a family friend.
Adam, as you answered, keep in mind the statute of limitations.
Yeah, I was going to say that's Podhoretz. I'm almost certain that Adams was having an acid trip in Washington Square Park. But no, go ahead, Nagourney. What's your favorite Washington Square Park memory?
So I have a flippant one and a serious one, but I'll go with a serious one. I actually remember being there like 2 or 3 nights after the collapse of the World Trade Center, and it's when you were first beginning to see all the leaflets go up where people were looking for lost relatives. And it was obvious at that point that obviously those people were gone, and it reminded me of how much Washington Square Park is very much a community center for that part of New York. I live 2 blocks away from there, so it has a big place in my heart. Plus the pot dealers, but that's...
So guys, let's talk about the Democratic race. Last we talked, the contest was sort of just underway. Campaigning here is different than campaigning anywhere else for all the reasons we all know and talked about. You got a guy from Brooklyn, you got a woman who was a senator from here. Do you agree with kind of the conventional wisdom that she has proved to be a more adept competitor with a fingertip feel for what it means to campaign here effectively than he has?
I think she's done a lot better here than she was, or appears to be doing a lot better here than she was over the past month, which of course makes sense. I mean, if she doesn't have a feel for New York politics, having run and won here twice, then she really ought to hang it up and go home and retire. And I don't know whether he's not particularly adept. That it's more that she clearly knows how to play New York City urban Democratic politics, and 40 or 45% of the vote in the state is here in the city.
Adam, you know, Sanders has this big what they hope will be an iconic event tonight. He went to Coney Island, he went to his old home in Brooklyn, but he doesn't seem to have done what is required in campaigning here, which is to create moments, right?
Right, and I'm guessing that he's assuming, looking at what happened with Obama there 8 years ago, to create a moment tonight. You know, my sense of him is that a lot of people, as we all know, come to New York thinking, okay, we can do this. We've done Iowa, we've done, you know, whatever state is before. And he's probably thinking, well, I sort of came from here, so I know how it's played. And my sense is that he doesn't, and he's trying to find his sea legs. And we know it's harder for everyone than they think it is. And it might be harder for him because he's coming in there with the assumption that, hey, I'm a New Yorker, therefore I know the city better. I mean, I see he's going to the Vatican, I guess, tomorrow. That makes sense to me for someone running for mayor 15 years ago. I'm not so sure it makes much sense for some guy in the middle of a really contested presidential campaign right now.
Adam, I want to come back to the Vatican thing in a minute, but let me just stick with this one thing. It seems to me that the tensions between these two campaigns have escalated in the last few days. Basically, they got to New York, and the gloves, which had more or less been on for pretty much the Democratic, throughout the Democratic nomination fight, sort of came off, and both campaigns are now much testier with each other. Who do you think is getting the better of that negativity in a political sense, if you know what I mean?
It's hard to tell. I think at this point it's probably Hillary Clinton. I'm not surprised. And I'll tell you why. It's because you don't expect it from Bernie Sanders. I mean, he sort of presented himself as a different kind of politician. So when you see him do this kind of stuff that, you know, saying she was unqualified and some of the other stuff, it doesn't seem right. It doesn't fit right, because one of the things that's been so refreshing about him this whole, at least to his supporters, this whole campaign, is that he's not part of the regular mold. So I think maybe he's not coming out so well. I do think that New York, because of the tabloid, ethos of the place, brings out the negativity of a campaign. You're rewarded for being outrageous, as Mark said before, of staging those moments that get attention, that break through the clutter, which has always been more intense in New York, I think, than any place else.
Yeah, but you know, the weird moments in New York have been on the Republican side. I mean, you had John Kasich going to a Hasidic neighborhood in Brooklyn, misunderstanding which Hasidic sect he was going to, because he was going to an anti-Zionist sect that votes entirely Democratic, and he spent 4 hours there and lectured them on how the Passover holiday is a prefiguring of the birth of Jesus, which is really not a message that you want to impart to Hasidim, but there was no point in him being there. So that was a fake bad moment And that's the kind of bad tabloid moment that has gone on. Ted Cruz having trouble in the Bronx. They're not quite having those, either of them, either Sanders or Hillary.
John is, as viewers and followers of his on Twitter know, interested in stopping Donald Trump. I'm wondering what has happened in, say, the last week that gives you the most hope that Trump can be denied the nomination?
Well, the only thing is procedural. That is, Ted Cruz winning all these sort of, backdoor deals and outplaying Trump on these delegate selection processes. It's perfectly legitimate. If you were watching just the, outward campaign, you would say Cruz has done absolutely nothing to build on his victory in Wisconsin. In fact, his numbers in New York seem to be going down instead of up. The polling in all these subsequent states, in Pennsylvania and Connecticut and Maryland, is not looking good for Cruz and is looking pretty good for Trump. So the Stop Trump movement now is entirely a backdoor movement until May, when we shift back to the Midwest and to the West for the last states.
Adam, New York, the California primary is 6 weeks away or so, but is there any feeling out there? There's been some candidate activity. Is there any feeling out there that it's approaching, or is California, as usual, focused on other things?
Oh, yeah, no. I mean, as you know, this is not a state where you get primaries a lot. I mean, every now and then, for a lot of reasons, the state is just kind of at the tail end of everything. But there is a lot of sense, and there's a lot of interest and excitement. You see it in terms of, I saw Sanders protesters on the street in front of CNN. Trump just appointed a statewide campaign director who's coming here at the end of, he was supposed to be here last week, he's coming here, I think, in 2 weeks. So, there's a lot of interest, and it's a very interesting state. There's a sense that, and I'll defer to you guys or John on this, that this state could be determinative in who the Republican nominee is going to be. So it's really interesting to watch, actually.
Well, don't turn to me too quick, Adam. I want you to even though we're mostly talking about the New York primary, Ted Cruz was out in California just a couple days ago. You pointed out it is obviously very important. Just explain on the Republican side, what is the state of the California Republican Party? Like, what's that going to look like when they get out there? Everybody thinks of California as a purely blue state, so not many people understand just what goes on in those 53 congressional districts across that state. So talk about that a little bit.
Okay, well, first of all, first thing is that the state Republican Party here is a minority party. What I mean by minority is that it's got less than, I believe, independent registered voters. It's diminishing in influence. They don't control the governors. They don't control either house. So they're not used to being in the center of attention. Right now, this is in this state, and I think partly like New York as well, it's a congressional district by congressional district contest, which means in some parts of the state, from looking at the polling that we've seen, Trump is going to do very well and win delegates. I can't see him sweeping the whole state. There's parts of the state where Cruz is doing very well, congressional districts again, so he'll probably pick up a lot of delegates. So I think this is going to be a little bit more of a mixed result. My guess right now is that Trump wins the overall popular vote, will come out with a significant number of delegates, but he won't get a sweep the way it looks like he might get in New York because of the system, the way it's set up here.
John, if that's the result, then Cruz is in a lot of trouble. I mean, if Cruz can't build, if the month of May and the early part of June is still Trump territory, and Trump is still, closer to a majority than Cruz is, and it's going into the 5 weeks before the convention, assuming Trump doesn't get the sufficient number of delegates, Cruz is not going to look like a winner. Cruz is not going to look like the guy you want to turn to instead of Trump, because he will have disappointed in the last 2 months of the campaign.
And just to adjudicate this question, your fingertip feel for your party. You said a second ago everything that's gone right for Cruz has been all about backroom deals, and everything that's gone right for Trump has been on the public stage. Just given the state of where your party is right now, how does that set up for trying to go to Cleveland if you're Ted Cruz and win that way? How well is that going to go down within the party if that's how Ted Cruz has to get there?
I think it would be a lot worse if Ted Cruz were Jeb Bush doing this. Obviously, Ted Cruz comes into this race with his own anti-establishment credentials, and the argument he's going to make is that he has demonstrated competency in his candidacy, and that Trump's incompetence at managing the rules and procedures of the Republican Party belies his claim that he is the guy who can come in from the outside and reform American politics. That said, if you don't win, you don't win. If Trump wins and he wins more states and he keeps winning more states and Cruz isn't winning more states and hasn't turned it around on him, I don't know what kind of argument that is. I mean, that really is an argument for just throwing the whole thing out, saying no one got a majority. Now we have 4 days to find the best person to run against Hillary, and it doesn't look like it's either of these guys. Not go with the guy who got less than the guy who's in the lead.
It's like all that sound, all that fury, you know what? Signifies nothing.
Yeah, exactly. Or worse than nothing. I mean, will have meant that a year and a month or a year and 2 months of campaigning will have ended in failure for everyone. Yeah.
Adam, Trump, this is his first New York primary as a candidate. How do you appraise how he's done in kind of creating moments and fitting into the culture of the state as a candidate?
I feel like it looks like he's doing well in terms of fitting into the culture of the state. I have not seen him create any kind of big moments yet, but maybe he doesn't really need to. I mean, he's way in advance. He seems to be a better fit for the state than Cruz or Kasich. So my sense is that he's doing it pretty well. As we know, he's been involved in the culture, in the media culture of New York since the 80s, and he's been close to the gossip columnists and the political reporters and the editorial writers. He knows the way the place works. And obviously, as we talked about before, it's much different than it was, but there's still some similarities. And he knows how he gets attention, and he knows the dynamics, the media/political dynamics of the state. And I think he's playing that well in his shows.
But he's also playing against the world's longest lived unforced error, which was Cruz's New York values statement. Cruz saying that Trump represents New York values, not having the foggiest idea that 4 months later he was going to be trying to contend for every possible delegate that he could get here. That was short-term thinking with pretty bad long-term consequences, because all Trump's had to do here is say, Ted Cruz says he has, New York values are bad, and Cruz has gone down 7 or 8 points in the polls in the last week.
John and Adam, two gentlemen who represent decisively New York values.